Okay, so here's the record um, symbol. So I'm here for the first time in English in this podcast with Gary. We all know him as Gary from Fresh from the Farm Fungi, the guy that we all like to watch and learn so much from in YouTube. And I'm really super excited, even though we had a little chat before, to have you here in the podcast. I know that maybe you don't feel like a celebrity, but among the mushroom community, and especially here in Israel, that we are relatively a small community, you are very special and very appreciated. Everyone knows you and your videos, so excuse me if I'm a little bit excited about that.
Awesome. Well,
Because
I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on, and I could talk about mushrooms all day. So I know we tried to schedule this earlier, and I just had a newborn son in December, so everything's been kind of going crazy. But he's sleeping, and my wife is down there, so I'll have all the time to talk about mushrooms. And if you have any questions, I can answer those at the end or whatever, but this is my first time ever doing like an international podcast. So I'm in Colorado and it's 11 in the morning right now. So it's very cool to use this technology to, spread the word. And I love the mushroom community. So I'm super excited that you're having me on this podcast. And I just wanted to say thank you.
for sure, you're welcome. So I wanted to start actually maybe from the beginning, as we all see like so much knowledge, so much information that you spreading through the web. And the first question I wanted to ask, because I was really interested about how everything started for you. Did you start mycology as a hobby and then you moved into more professional, or did you really go to study? I heard in some of your videos that you had someone who's your mentor. I couldn't really understand who it is, but how things really
Yep.
started for you in this business.
Yeah. So my background is in medical laboratory technology. So that's what I went to school for university to study to work in the hospitals. And while I was going through all the lab work that was associated with my degree, I kind of gained an interest in mycology. That was about 10 or 12 years ago. And I've always been an avid gardener, so I always have a vegetable garden, and ever since I was really little, I was infatuated with growing food and having a vegetable and a perennial garden. And probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I just decided one year to try growing mushrooms. So I bought like a kit off of Amazon, and I put it in like a little plastic tote, and I had a little area in my garden planned for mushrooms. And it just like I inoculated some dirt with some grain spawn and let it sit in the side, like in the corner of my basement, for about 4 months. And then finally I looked in there and I saw like some mycelium forming. So I got really excited. And then about 2 days after that, it just turned green and it was all trichoderma. So it was like a huge failure. That was, my first experience with trying to grow mushrooms. And that kind of triggered like this passion, because I was like, what did I do wrong? How do mushrooms even grow? My experience up until that point was just with clinical mycology. So I did a lot of microscope work. We would detect fungal infections in our patients. So that was my understanding of mycology up until that point where I tried to grow mushrooms to eat. And then after that, that like maybe the following summer, where Paul Stamets, I don't know if you know him, but he's a big famous mycologist here in the United States. He came and gave a lecture at the local university. So I went there with my wife, and it was all about how mushrooms could help bees. And that was just like mind blowing. We're like, wow, like we never made the connection that, the mycelium is in the soil, and then the bees would go eat the mycelium, and then they would get some kind of a immune benefit from that, and it was helping them from getting infections, which it's a big problem. I don't know, globally, I guess, with the bee populations kind of facing these wing viruses, and that it was just a way to incorporate mushrooms into everyday life. And after that summer, I revisited trying to grow mushrooms just for myself to eat. So my wife, she found a grow kit on Craigslist, and then I went out and picked it up, and I ended up setting up like this little tent in my basement, and I put the mushroom in there, and it fruited. So it grew out mushrooms, and that was like, my first experience where I was amazed and like, wow, we grew these mushrooms and we ate them. They were oyster mushrooms, which I'd never even had those until that point. So that was like a whole new experience too, that up until then, I just thought every mushroom was the same. I just saw the white button mushrooms at the store, and I didn't even realize there was all these other varieties. So I joined the Mycological Society shortly after that, and they did a bunch of forays. And some of the people that I was working with, I worked at a lab at the time, and they would go elk hunting, and they talked about the chanterelle mushrooms. So they would go hunting for elk in the late fall, and that's when the chanterelles come out in Colorado. So they would pick up a bunch of those mushrooms, and then they would, have this huge feast with chanterelles and elk. And I was kind of, excited about that. And then, the following summer again, I went to the Telluride Mushroom Festival. So that was probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. And that was just mind blowing. There was people from all over the world that came and gave lectures about mushrooms. And just this whole time I was reading books and just studying YouTube videos. And slowly it just built into this big hobby. And then about 5 years ago, I was working at a lab. We were doing testing, like environmental testing on different products. And we had like a big change in our lab where we got a new lab manager, and I was working with the owners, and we did this huge project which took up like a lot of my time. And I decided at that point, like I saved up a bunch of money, and I really liked doing the mushrooms, so I decided to kind of quit that job and start my own business. Now, that was pretty tough in the beginning. I had to work, some part-time jobs on the side, but I remember the very first customer that I had, I put up an ad on Craigslist, and I was growing probably about 5 or 10 pounds of lion's mane a week at that point. And my wife and I were eating mushrooms every day. And then one time I put out an ad on the internet, and someone rode their bike to my house from like 20 minutes away to get these lion's mane mushrooms. And he bought all of them that I had. And I remember he opened up the bag and just grabbed one like an apple, and he ate it right in front of me. I was like, oh man, you're supposed to cook them. But right then I knew that there was a market for it. So I started growing more. We went to the farmer's market. So every summer, that's the majority of our business, is just selling mushrooms at the farmer's market. And then in the winter, like right now, that's when I do all my breeding. So I'm trying to create new varieties over the winter, so that every summer I can give my customers new mushrooms to try. And slowly over the past 5 or 6 years, it's just been growing and growing. And then this summer, we are going to be starting a week-long mentorship program. So we built a new Quonset in Sedalia, which is about 30 minutes south of my house right here in Denver. And we built a brand new building, and there's a cabin that I'm going to be fixing up. We already did a bunch of work on it, but that's kind of my vision, is to create this this mushroom paradise or mushroom mecca, something like that, where we can host people, and then they would stay there for a week, and we'll teach them how to grow mushrooms from start to finish. And especially during the summertime, it's going to be very active because we're scaling up our grow to about 400 pounds a week, which is a lot for me. And then we're going to be taking on a few different clients this year. So we're doing a CSA program, which is crop share. So every week we take a certain amount of mushrooms and give it to this farm that they work with local farmers, and they'll deliver our mushrooms along with other vegetables that are in season right to people's doorstep. So that's a new approach we're doing. We've had a few chefs reach out to us, which up until this point, we just haven't had enough mushrooms produced to provide it to larger clients. So that's kind of our new projects this year are going to be scaling our grow, doing these mentorship programs, and then also just keeping up with the higher production. So I think that's kind of like my background up until now. And then as far as the YouTube videos, I just loved making videos. About 10 or 12 years ago, I would just goof around with my friends, and we would make like snowboarding videos and different videos like mountain biking. And then slowly, I think one day I tried to make a video for MasterChef to get onto that, and I posted it on YouTube. And I was like, all right, well, this is pretty fun, so I'm going to start making videos about growing mushrooms. And ever since then, to me, it's like it's kind of recording my journey, but it also allows me to connect with the community, which I really love. The mushroom community, everyone's super friendly and open about sharing information. And the more and more I learn about it, the more I realize that I don't really know that much at all. So it's like this perpetual wheel of just sharing knowledge and then learning more and then sharing and learning. So that's kind of my story. And yeah, so I don't know if you have any questions about that.
No, I have so many other questions to ask you
Yeah,
after you said all of that. I would like
yeah,
to later go a little bit more into depth about the mentorship and how
yep,
it's maybe used for our community as well. So if I forget, please remind me. But one thing I wanted to ask you about that, because I also saw that in your website, and also you said right now about the winter time. So
yep,
I saw that you guys selling mushrooms from foraging during
yep.
the winter, and also you said now that you're not growing mushrooms in the winter. Is there a reason why you don't grow them in the winter?
Yeah, so mostly because the demand is really low. So most of the demand for us, like I said, is at the farmers market. So our farmers market goes from April until November. So that's kind of when I grow my mushrooms. Um, but another thing is that it's really cold. So in order to grow the mushrooms during the winter, I would have to heat my whole building, and that gets pretty expensive, especially in February. We're going to start our production up in about 4 weeks, but right now at my cabin, there's probably 2 feet of snow, and it's like 10 degrees at nighttime, and then maybe it gets up to mid 40s during the day. So it's mostly a temperature thing because I would have to heat my whole building. And then it's also the demand, where there's not as much demand after the holidays. So we decided to shut down and that kind of brings me up to the mentor who I always talk about. So the guy who taught me how to grow mushrooms, his name's Anthony DeFranco, and he is in Niagara Falls, New York. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York, where it gets really cold winters too. And that was how he designed his business, was that it was just him, his wife, and one other person, and they would produce about 1,000 pounds a week of mushrooms. So that was like my inspiration. Right when I started getting into it, my dad, he is friends with his wife, so he reached out to me, and on Thanksgiving about 6 years ago, I went and toured his farm, and he was shutting everything down, and I was like, "What do you guys do like during the winter?" And he's like, "Oh, well, we just take vacation." So I'm like, "Wow, like if I could set up a business where after the holidays, I could take 2 or 3 months off and kind of reset and then start up again every spring." It's very intensive work. So during, the June, July, August, every day it's 12-hour days. But then by the time November rolls around, we shut everything down. And then I get, December, January, February to kind of relax and reset, and that's when I do my breeding. So it's a lot of lab work, and that's just kind of how I decided to build my business. I know that there's one farm in Colorado that grows all year long, and they're pretty large scale. They have maybe 20 employees, and they grow a lot more mushrooms than me, maybe 5 or 6 thousand pounds a week. So that's kind of the level you have to be at to sustain that whole entire year of growing. But I met the owners at the Telluride Mushroom Festival, and they're really nice people. They're super open, but it is a lot of work. So for them to go 12 months out of the year, I tip my hat to them, because that must be a really long season. But they've been doing it since the 80s, so they seem to have everything dialed in, and it was just a personal choice for me to have some time off, especially now that I have a new baby, and I love snowboarding. So if like right now is like peak snowboard season, so I get to go out, and whenever I want I can snowboard, and then I work my long hours in the summer. So that's just what I decided to do.
You know, it's very interesting. Like in Israel, and I know that in other countries as well, there is a big difference in the climate, and it's causing a problem sometimes because people trying to learn to study how to grow mushrooms. You mentioned Paul Stamets is also very known here, and the majority of the people in Israel that starting to go into this business, they're usually going to read his book, Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushroom. And
Yep.
dynamic is so different that we have a problem that um, the the summer is difficult.
Yep.
So it's almost impossible to grow mushrooms in the summer because of the climate in
So
comparison to
what
you guys.
what it, yeah, what is your summer season? Because yeah, I'm up in the mountains. So for me, summer at my new place, it's like 60s, 70s. So I that's Fahrenheit. I don't know the Celsius, maybe like 20 to 28 degrees Celsius. And then in the nighttime it gets,
This is our winter.
40s. Yeah.
This is our winter around
Oh yeah.
20
Yeah.
Celsius.
Yep. So yeah, you have to keep that in mind. You can do you can still successfully grow, but you would have to use different types of mushrooms. So I think that, there's cold weather mushrooms, and then there's, temperate weather mushrooms, and then there's warm weather mushrooms. So you can kind of rotate in different mushrooms, but for me, the demand was too low, so I just decided to not do it. But that might change over the future because there are cold mushrooms that I can do in the winter, like enoki, and they can handle almost freezing. But um, yeah, so it's like a two-edged sword. Is that even if I grew tons and tons of enoki mushrooms, it's harder to find buyers in the winter because everyone's inside, and they don't go to the farmers markets as much. But as far as the climate goes, I would just research different mushrooms in different parts of the world that are mimicking that time of the year. So I know blue oysters, they can handle really cold. Um, enoki, like I said, cordyceps. Cordyceps is a really popular one now. That we do small batches over the winter, but mostly just for breeding. Um, but yeah, so that's interesting that, different parts of the world, it's kind of opposite. And I don't want to discourage people from not trying to grow them during like the not ideal season, but you can just select different mushrooms for different times of the year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the sometimes the temperature can get into 45 degrees Celsius here. This is how
Wow.
hot it
Yeah.
is. So a few years ago, the mushrooms that think about pink oyster mushroom,
Yeah, pink oyster. Yeah.
the reishi mushroom, and mushrooms like that, you can't really get to a point when you can grow them outside during the summer because it's even too hot for them.
Yep.
But there is one mushroom that we succeeded to cultivate outside in the summer in Israel, and it's also very famous in Thailand. It's the Schizophrem commune.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, this one grew really well. It can take 4 degrees Celsius and can grow. Um,
Wow.
but I wanted to ask you something about the scale because this is also something that I can see really well here in Israel, and I'm wondering if it's anywhere near that in the United States. Today, farmers that go and they grow in a really large scales, like 50,000 kilos a month and more, they don't have anyone to sell the mushrooms to except for the big grocery stores like Walmart or others. And those big corporations will not pay as much for 1 pound of mushrooms as the farmer market customers will pay. So a
Yep.
lot of times it's better for someone to be a small scale
Yep.
and sell in the mushroom farm in the how you call it, the farmers market,
Yep.
then going like really big and is going to make the same or even less money by growing really big. So is it something like that in the market in the United States as well?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So it kind of depends on the mushrooms though, because there are a few companies that are doing really well at a large scale, but they have to be selective about what mushrooms they're growing. So a lot of them will do the button mushrooms and king oyster and lion's mane, the ones that have a longer shelf life so that they can, pick their mushrooms, ship them out, and then sit on the grocery store for a week or 10 days, and they won't diminish like an oyster mushroom or the chestnuts. So it really depends on the types of mushrooms that you're growing and the shelf life. But there are a few mushroom farms, like I said, that they grow at a really big scale, but you have to be really dialed in with from the point you pick your mushrooms to when it hits the shelf. They You can get a good price if it's a fresh mushroom. So I think the price drops off really quickly if your mushrooms are sitting in your fridge for 2 or 3 days before you can even sell them. For me, I prefer the farmers markets because I like meeting the customers. So you can tailor your mushrooms. You can choose when to pick them, and you know the different flavors that your customers like. So the direct feedback is very important to me. And I feel like you're right. You get more money for the same mushrooms because you're cutting out that middleman. So I think that, I'll always be a pretty small scale, but direct to consumer because I like talking to my customers. It's very rewarding to be like, oh, well, we love these mushrooms. We cooked them up with our meal last week and we want to get the same kind, or what other kinds you have. Like, you get that feedback. So that's helpful with, running your business. And then also, you don't have to pay someone in between to distribute them. So I think you're right. I work really long hours. I want to maximize that return, and I choose to just stay relatively small. There's ways where you can scale up, like the sterilization. So our business is vertically integrated. So we do everything from spore all the way till fruit. And if you can pull that off, the margins are really good. The problem is that it's a lot of labor at a certain level, but we are upgrading our equipment. So there's a few companies in America that are making like medium scale autoclaves, where up until, about 5 years ago, if you wanted to get big, you would have to invest $50,000 or $100,000 into a retort autoclave. But now there's these companies like Blue Myco, ETS Mycology. There's a couple other ones out there. The Big Fungi is one where they're making these, or a Bubba Barrel. That's a big one and that I use right now. But it's like a middle of the road autoclave, so that you only have to pay 10,000 or 15,000, and then you can produce 400 to 500 pounds of mushrooms instead of investing into this big autoclave where, in order to make your money back, you have to produce 2,000 pounds a week. So it's like the products are following the development of the industry. And I think that that would be a good breakthrough for your region, is if you could find like a cheaper autoclave that could get you the work hours, because I used to do it in little pressure cookers, and it would take me about 16 hours a week just to do my sterilization. But when I bought my Bubba Barrel, it only takes 2 hours. So that's 14 hours of labor that it freed up just from one piece of equipment. And my next update is going to be with my fruiting room. So we're doing larger fruiting rooms and fully automated. So I don't have to worry about, making sure that the reservoirs are filled and little things that take time throughout the day. If you can eliminate the labor, then that's going to make your business a lot better, because then I can focus on doing, podcasts like this and going out to forage for new mushrooms and things that I was bogged down by doing the labor. Also, hiring people is, a good thing, but it's really hard to find someone that knows mushrooms, especially, you know, I guess it's a delicate task. So picking mushrooms is you have to have like a artistic feel almost, where, I've had people just come and help out and they do a really good job, but then, to find a part-time person to help us pick mushrooms, maybe that's our next step after figuring out the fruiting room. But yeah, I think that the key is to reduce your labor, and that can be done with the proper equipment that wasn't really available maybe 10 years ago.
This is also very interesting because um, I tell you, Israel would be more like United States in that matter, but as far as I have seen mushroom growers in third world countries. For example, in India, where I've been doing a lot of studies about mushroom, the labor is extremely cheap, while technology is extremely expensive. So they would
Yeah.
choose a really different approach, and they will take a lot of workers just in order to not use expensive technology. They go to pasteurization instead of sterilization, and they will use non-enriched substrate at all, like grow oysters on straw and stuff like that. But I think in that matter, what you're saying is really a good idea for us, because also here the labor is expensive, and
Mhm.
technology is relatively available in good prices right now. But I wanted to ask before about the mushroom foraging, because
Mhm.
you know another thing that I think we have differences is that in Israel, it's illegal to sell a mushroom that you forage in the wild, but I know
Mhm.
that it's not like that in other countries, and sometimes you need to have a special license to do it. I've seen that in Europe, so you can actually forage a mushroom in the forest and you can sell it in the market.
Yep. Yeah. So personally, I don't have the certification, but we work with foragers that's all they do for a living. So you're right that you need a certification. I could probably go out and take my training and do all of that, but for me, I just like to go out and maybe once or twice during the season with my wife, and we just like to go for hikes and for my own personal use. Like I'll pick porcini mushrooms and I'll eat them all. But then yeah, we work with two or three people that they've been doing it since the 80s. So they have a journal with all their spots, and then they'll call me up on a Monday and be like, "Hey, we're gonna get this many mushrooms," and I'll be like, "Okay, I'll buy half of them," and then that way, I have a relationship with someone who they just follow the rainstorms, and they have the knowledge where they don't necessarily go to the farmers market. So it's kind of like a good relationship because they spend all their time hunting and then I could just sell them. That is how it works out for us. I know that there's different parts of the United States where you don't have to even have a license. Like in the Midwest, you can go out and forage morel mushrooms, which people can pick 400 pounds a day. Um, and there's some people that they're really good at it, and they'll just pick mushrooms for like 3 months, and then that's all they do for the whole year because they're so valuable, because the time frame where they're fruiting is very short. But yeah, there's a someone called it's called the Modern Forager, and if you look up their company, he sells these maps where it's almost like a treasure hunt. So he'll go off the record from the year before, and for example, the burn morels, which out in the Midwest here, after a forest fire, the next year there will be burn morels, and those go for between $30 to $50 a pound. But you have to know where to go. It's very dangerous sometimes because they're way up in the remote areas, and you have to have the proper gear to get there. It's a different lifestyle than just growing mushrooms. I like to just grow them because I know exactly if I put in this much, then I get this much out. But some people, they like, the adventure of going out and hunting. And I like to just casually go out and look for it for myself. Um, I don't know if I would be able to have the capacity because some years are dry, some years are wet. It's very unpredictable. Where personally I like the consistency that if you're growing mushrooms, every week you do this, then you get this much out, and that's how I like my business. But I do know a few people that that's all they do for a living, and you know it's a different lifestyle, but it seems really fun, but also kind of dangerous. It's
It brings me to another question about consistency and understanding what actually you have in hand. You know, a lot
mhm.
of, I don't know if a lot, but there are small scale mushroom growers that they choose not to handle all the genetics and everything. They just want to buy a already made spawn, and they
Yep.
use that in order to inoculate the substrate. And it seems like this is a road that have a really specific ending because you can only reach so much if you're not familiar with more knowledge about how to breed and to create your own genetics, because you're going to be dependent on someone else all the time. It's a little bit like you said about foraging mushrooms. You don't know what you're going to get.
Mhm.
Do you feel the same? Like someone who's owning his own farm should like usually dive deeper into genetics and make his own strains and work on them for as much as he can.
Yeah. So my thoughts on that are that it might work in the beginning. So if you are questioning, is there a market for these mushrooms? It helps you kind of figure out that question, because if you buy spawn, you make your mushrooms and they all sell out, then you know right away, okay, there's a market for this. And then the next thing is that a lot of people who have like a hydroponic farm with like lettuce and herbs, and they want to diversify. So they will cut out the whole process and just buy spawn and fruit mushrooms. And then now they have another product for their farm. So I've seen about two or three farms like that around me where they'll grow mushrooms, like one type of mushroom, and they'll just buy the spawn and fruit out the mushrooms, and they're not living off of just those mushrooms, but they added it as like another product, because they're becoming so popular. So I feel like they're just leaning into the craze right now. But for me and my business, I always made it a point to be fully vertical, because I want to be able to create new genetics. And if there's a problem, I know it's on me. So a lot of people that buy spawn, they'll have a bad run and then they'll blame it on the spawn. And it might not be that. Like, what if there was contamination that got into your grow room and it wasn't even the supplier's fault? Then, you're just creating like a false premise, which that's not good for business. So I feel like you have more control if you're doing it yourself. Um, but there are a lot of reliable spawn producers. It's just your margins are going to be less. You won't have the same um, you won't have the same selection, like you said, and then also you won't be able to diagnose problems as well. But it can be done. I've seen, like I said, there's probably two or three farms that they just buy spawn and fruit mushrooms, but usually they're also doing something else like lettuce or microgreens is a big one. So just other food products, and then it takes away like the complexity of growing mushrooms to do that.
And when you're trying to achieve new genetics, I saw that you're isolating spores and actually making new strains. What exactly are the things that you're trying to achieve? You're looking at faster growth, bigger
Yep.
fruits, tolerance for a certain temperature. What are the things that you're trying to achieve by creating new strains?
Yep. So right now, for my business, I am taking the weakest and the lowest yielding mushroom every year and running it through my breeding process, and then at the other end, I get a healthier mushroom. It's bigger yields, faster growth, temperature variance tolerance. So that's where I'm at right now. But in the future, I could foresee me trying to produce just different colors and different just characteristics and flavors. So when I first started, I was using different types of wood, and I would love to go back to that, because I think that, you know, there's a difference between a maple, like a oyster mushroom growing on maple, and then an oyster mushroom growing on oak. And if I can decipher kind of the genetics that make that express itself and then implement that into a different generation, maybe I can bring out different flavors. So that you have the variability to kind of fine tune what you're looking for. I just kind of run it through and then see what comes out and then pick my favorite. But right now for my business, I'm focusing on efficiency, because if I make my mushrooms year after year after year have higher yields, then I will be able to, get returns on that year after year. So 10 years from now, instead of getting 1 pound per bag, maybe I'm getting 1.8 pounds per bag, and I'm not doing any extra work. So that is like my long-term approach. But sometimes I get a weird looking mushroom, like the albino beach mushroom. It was just a mutation from a beach mushroom, and it gets a lot of attention at the farmers market because it just looks cool. It's like a big white mushroom and it has little dimples on the top. And for me, at the farmers market, you want to catch people's eye. So there is value in finding just weird mutations. So I think that my priority is to speed up the process and get more yield. And then my secondary value is just finding different colors or different characteristics of the mushrooms. I've been experimenting with the almond mushroom, and the flavor on that is just incredible. It tastes like a pistachio or like an almond, like it, and no one else in my region is growing that one. So being the first to market, that has value sometimes, because maybe a chef wants, a pistachio flavored mushroom, and then they're going to be introduced to my company, and then maybe I could provide them with other mushrooms too. So it's just a constant balance between finding the next great mushroom and increasing the efficiency of my farm so that I can keep competing in my region, because there are, bigger scale farms, but eventually I'm going to catch up to them and have, the full control of my process because I'm starting from spore. So that was always my philosophy. I know that, people can be successful with their own methods, but that's what I chose. And we always wanted to stay pretty small because I like doing the videos. I like teaching classes. And if I got too big, I feel like I wouldn't be able to do the things that I like.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. And I wanted to ask you about the materials. You grow on like wood pellets, right? When you said wood, you mentioned pellets. So
Yep.
this is something that is very expensive here in Israel. If you go from maple or wood stuff, the cheapest we can get here is oak, and
Mm-hmm. Oak
this
is
is
the
why,
best, I think.
yeah, and it's also the cheapest
Yeah.
we have here from the different
Yep.
woods. But a lot of people here grow on straw pellets that
Mm-hmm.
is sometime enriched with sugar beet flakes.
Yep.
And one of the things that we're trying to do a lot is to create a genetic that will allow mushroom to grow on straw instead of wood. So with oysters, it's pretty simple. Sometimes you don't even need to do anything. They just grow on straw easily.
Yep.
But doing this with shiitake or other types of really wood mushrooms is really a great challenge. And this is
Yep.
something we're trying to do a lot in here, to sometimes to even just train the mycelium to break straw and to grow on it, and sometimes really try to work with spores and see if we can do that. but we have different materials available. This is the main difference here.
Yeah, so that's what I try to teach that in my classes, because some people will come from Florida and there is cocoa coir and palm leaves and all of those materials like straw that's just basically free, but then they see me growing on pellets when I didn't necessarily choose that because it makes the best mushrooms, mostly because of the cost. Like the pellets are cheap here, so we're right next to the Midwest and there's a lot of soy, so that's why we use the soy pellets. So it's kind of like cool that mushrooms can grow on so many different things. You should tailor your operation to what's available in your local region, because then you're going to get better margins and you will be able to research and try to train your mushrooms to grow on those products. So if I was starting off and trying to make mushrooms that were going to grow on straw, I would take spores, and maybe you can do a liquid culture and chop up straw and put it in the liquid culture, and then chop up the straw, put it in the agar, and then you could grow out the mycelium in vitro, and it might be, learning how to digest that. So by the time it goes onto the bulk substrate, you would have more success. Um, Also, there's a big wave here in Colorado and just in America right now, the cannabis industry, so hemp. I've done numerous trials on hemp herd. I don't know what the capability or the availability in Israel, but hemp is a great product to grow mushrooms if you can find some of that. It's in between straw and wood, so I feel like a lot of mushrooms like that, um, because there's a huge industry and people are just throwing that out here. So one of my friends out in the San Juans, which is like 2 hours west, he gets hordes of it for free now. So he's basically just growing mushrooms on free waste, and he's doing a really good job. So I feel like finding materials that are local to you is going to benefit, your company. It's going to benefit the industry around you because it's going to be cheaper. So I feel like people should tailor their grow to what's available instead of just copying someone else, because there's a lot more that goes into it besides just the output that substrate creates.
Yes, and we have a lot of dates. So, they cut the leaves of the dates almost every year, and there's a lot of them. This is a really good source, and also banana plants that they take out. Um, I wanted to ask just before we finish the hour, and then we will be happy to have you for questions if you have time for us. But
Yep.
so I wanted to go back to the mentorship that you mentioned earlier,
Yep.
because when I heard about that, I was really happy to know that this is something that's available, and people can have that. But I wanted to ask, because some people from other countries maybe are not able to come to the United States. Uh,
Hmm.
did you have any kind of mentoring that it's, I don't know, like on a video chat or from
Yep.
um, from afar, and people can actually hire you for this kind of work for them?
Yeah, so we're actually in the middle of doing a video series. So I'm going to be, in addition to my YouTube videos, we're going to do like a 10 video crash course. And I'm going to be putting that out on Patreon so that um, for someone who is just starting out, they could just watch these videos and then they'll have a better understanding of how to grow mushrooms. It's been something I've always wanted to do, but I've just put it on the back burner. And then um, we did. So I work a lot with my friend Zach, which that's kind of how I got into the classes. His company only does mushroom grow classes, and we've done a few online ones, it gets really complicated because there's people at different levels of expertise. Like someone might be a beginner and then someone's, an expert, and then they're asking completely different questions. So we thought we're going to provide a product for the very beginning people. And then we have our YouTube, which is all mostly experiments at this point. So I'm going to be doing a lot more breeding, a lot more outdoor growing. And then as far as someone who's interested in starting a business, that is who we are going to provide the mentorship for. So someone who's already been growing mushrooms for, a couple years maybe, or someone who's just curious about starting a mushroom farm, you can come to our farm and we'll show you the whole process for a whole week, and you'll get a really good understanding of what it takes to grow mushrooms. And then I did write an ebook. We have our Growing Gourmet Mushrooms for Market. That is like 100 pages of basic information. So if you're looking to just get started, that's a good resource. And then as far as like one-on-one mentorships, I did do some consultations in the past, but it's a lot to handle with my new farm that I'm scaling up. So I might go back to that in a few years when things settle down. But for right now, we have our ebook, which is like basic, and then I'm working on like a start to finish video series. So it's going to be 10 videos, 30 minutes long. So you can just, join our Patreon, and I'm going to create this little mat so that you will be able to follow along exactly what I'm doing. And then that way you'll be able to grow mushrooms successfully. And then you can kind of research on the internet, because there's so much knowledge out there now that, if you just do your homework, you should be able to kind of scale up. And then if you have more questions, my farm will be open to whoever wants to join in for that mentorship program. And I'm looking really forward to meeting a lot of people that way. I really love the mushroom community. So getting a whole week to spend time with someone who's curious about growing mushrooms is, that is one of my dreams. So to get to this point has been, wonderful. And I appreciate the mushroom community and just the YouTube community. Everyone's been really supportive. So I feel like that's kind of my trajectory over the next couple of years, is just going to be focused on just growing our farm, teaching more people, spreading the word. I think that mushrooms are definitely going to be part of the future. If they're not already, they're already getting really popular, but I think that they're here to stay. It just makes sense to grow nutritional food off of what would be waste or compost, and then it also helps regenerate the soil. So part of the reason why I chose the site to put our farm is because the soil was so dry and dusty. But then over the years, all of that mushroom compost is going to be, spread out on our property. So I can eventually plant fruit trees and do some raised beds and just bring that area back to life, which I think in the next 10 or 20 years, the soil health of this planet is going to be another problem that we're going to have to tackle. So that's where mushrooms are going to come in. So I think that the security of having a mushroom farm is very good right now. And, sharing that knowledge and just sharing the experience of growing mushrooms with everyone that I can, that's kind of my life mission. And I'm planning on doing it for another, 50 or 60 years or however long I can.
This is so great. I wanted to mention about that. A lot of people, especially people who really begins, they go into YouTube and they want to study and they're going online, but the major problem is that they can't find the connection between the different stages of mushroom growing, and they see one video that explains about how to prepare spawn, and one video that explained about something else, and they don't understand the order. So I think that this is a great thing that you're doing, to put everything in order for someone who really wants to start, especially for beginners. It's going to be a great help, because if they can take this kind of course online, they will have a better ability to study by themselves from YouTube, from other videos later, because the main problem is really how to understand what comes first and what comes later. And I also wanted to ask, because some people, they have some time and they visit the United States. I know that I have a family there, so usually once a year I'm going to visit in the United States. Are you doing like tours or anything like that in your farms, or not at all?
Yeah, so I'm going to open it to the public for like Fridays. So my vision is to have like 1 day a week where I can set everything aside and people can come and talk to me, and we'll have mushrooms available to be purchased. We just haven't gotten there yet. It's kind of still in its early construction. Like we're getting our electric in, we're just putting up our grow room, so it's very early. But over the course of time, that's definitely part of our plan, is to open it up to the public so people can come tour. And yeah, so it's definitely coming down the pipeline. We're just not quite there yet.
Okay, that's great. Maybe I'll be there in around August, and I'll talk to you
Oh
about
yeah.
coming.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely let me know. Let me know. I'd love to show you everything.
we we just getting to the end of this hour. This is passed so quickly. Um, I, I'm going to thank you and everything, and then I'm going to open the video chat for a free conversation if someone wants to ask something. And again, Gary, if you have to go, you have something to do, don't feel like you have to go. Like we would love you to stay, but as much as you have time for us, it would be great.
Yeah, I'll answer some questions here. I don't hear my son fussing yet, but yeah, so I feel like I got time.
Okay, so just thank you very much for participating in this podcast and being part of our community and giving us from your knowledge. I'm going to finish this podcast, and we're going to continue this conversation just freely with everyone. I'm just going to open the mic for everyone who wants to participate.
All right. Yeah, thank you once again. Thanks for having me on. But yeah, I'm down to talk mushrooms. So if anyone's